I'm going to be talking to you about our HEIDA project. Some of you might have already started to look at what we were doing on the website or on the LinkedIn group. So the idea for today is to make a brief overview of what the project is, why did we decided to do this. You know, it's a lot of work, very rewarding, but a lot of work, and then where we are now. So we will present to you a short demonstration of the online tool, what we call the HEIDA tool, and also of the online training module. And the idea of today is that after you see this, you start to think about your institution, if this would be a good resource for your institution and your reality, your needs, and ideally then contact us after you have discussed this internally to start using the tool. It's a free resource, open code. As Andy was saying before, it needs to be built on a strong foundation, and we'll talk about this in the presentation. But here what we want is to create a little army of ambassadors for the HEIDA tool that you can tell others at your university and at other universities about what we have done here, and really to give us your feedback. Let's say the tool and the training module are 99% ready. There's still room for 1% or a little bit more of improvement, and that's why we're very keen to hear your honest opinion on things that you think work well, things that we could add, things that are not very clear, okay? So, very brief overview. The HEIDA project has a very, very long official title, which I'm not gonna say here, but basically we're looking at data-driven decision-making for the internationalization of higher education institutions. So we're looking not at a systems level of, let's say, Turkey or Spain in terms of its whole system, but what we can do at an organizational level. And it also touches on the topic of organizational management, people, skills. So it's funded by the Erasmus Plus program that I think most of you will be familiar with as a Key Action 2 strategic partnership project. It has a duration of 2 years, roughly. So we're now at, let's say, the end phase of the project. And it has been delivered by 3 partners, Koç University as the coordinator, and then Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona from Spain. And I would like to just take a second to introduce our colleagues from Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, Georgetta, Javier, Marta, and Joaquin. Please also feel free throughout today to ask them questions about the project and about their institution. And we also, our other partner is the International School for Social and Business Studies, ISSBS, from Slovenia. And we have our colleagues here, Nada and Valeri. If you can wave your hands, so I think some of you might have met them already. And you know, I have to say thank you to them, because it has been a real collaborative effort, and we wouldn't be here if we were not be able to work like that. Now, data and higher education data and how to use it descriptively, predictively, big data, these are buzzwords nowadays. As our vice rector was saying earlier, we're kind of catching up a bit late to this whole game. And when we started writing the application for this project, we realized, okay, we're not starting from zero. There have been other projects before that have done very valuable things, and what we should try to do is build on that. How what has been done before can be improved so that universities can actually use it. So we started from the, let's say, the point of view that there's some assumptions about complexity in higher education institutions. Basically now, most universities want to expand. They want to do more things, more activities, more programs, more international students, more degrees. So this means complexity. It means more data being generated. We also realize that now most institutions, especially in Europe, are listing internationalization as a strategic goal. So this wasn't the case 10 years ago. Now it's at least on the mission statement of most universities in one place or another, or of departments, or of specific programs. And just to repeat a bit of what was said before, senior managers at universities, not only presidents or vice chancellors, vice presidents, directors of units, deans, or graduate school directors, they are trying to make decisions based not only on experience, gut feeling, this is how it was done in my time type approaches, but also on data. It's not always easy. And why? Because they are getting pressures from everywhere to be more efficient and more effective with smaller budgets. This is especially the case in specific European countries in which the overall higher education systems and enrollment numbers are declining, and public funding for higher education is also declining. There's also increased expectations for transparency and accountability. All of us who have worked in one way or another with the Erasmus program are very aware of this in terms of how exchange activities, mobility activities are monitored and the level of detail and transparency that is involved. There's also more competition than ever before to attract talent and funding. So again, we are in countries in which, at least for example in Turkey, there is a growing number of universities that are competing for the same students, both national and international. And the same thing for research grants, for funding, for programs. And then there's also a growing appetite from administrators as well as from students to see how could we provide a better service to the staff, to faculty, and especially to students based on predictive analysis. What you will see is that what we're talking about today is mostly descriptive, okay? What our tool is gonna be doing is telling you this is what the university has been doing, this is how it has been performing up until now. But it doesn't even go into the territory of how do we use this data for predicting behavior in the future. When it comes to, for example, student progression, learning outcomes, employability of our graduate students. So let's say that that's the next phase, but we should start at least with this part of getting better at managing data in internationalization. So the project has officially, let's say, 5 outputs. However, the key, the core result of this project is 2 things. This online tool, the HEIDA tool, and the online training module. So the HEIDA tool, we will do a demonstration. It's a web-based, free-to-use resource, adaptable to the institutional needs, and I will explain what that means in a moment. And what we want to do is basically have a way of easily adding, searching, visualizing, and reporting on data related to internationalization, okay? Then the training module says, well, before you start going into all the trouble of telling your coordinators, your deans to start looking, collecting data, cleaning up bugs in spreadsheets, start collecting things that were never collected before, there needs to be a previous step of actually clarifying why do we want this data? What is it that we're trying to achieve? How can we use this data in a better way? And that's what the training module aims to do. That training module is also a free resource that's hosted on Moodle, an e-classroom that I think you're also familiar with. It's available already in English, and it will also be available in Turkish, Slovenian, and Spanish, because these are the countries of the project partners. And when you look at the structure, it's a series of suggested readings, case studies, exercises, and some complementary readings to enhance let's say, the capability of the people who are taking the training. As I said, it's a 2-year project, roughly divided into 3 phases. Throughout that, we did a literature review looking at the topic of internationalization and use of data, of decision-making for internationalization. Those reports are available on our website, of the project website as well. We did some focus groups with higher education representatives from different units and different levels in Turkey, in Slovenia, and in Spain. And I see some of you are here again, and thank you for coming back. I'll talk about the 3rd step here. Oh, sorry. We did an online questionnaire survey of European universities in February this year, and that was a very useful activity for us because we were able to tell what is the perception of reality of these institutions, of how they manage data, and then how do they find using a tool like the one we're trying to build. The second phase, let's say it's the testing, is we created this kind of proxy tool, beta early version of this. And yeah, we have been tweaking it as we go along, as we get more feedback from different sources, as well as the training module. And what we're doing now in this later phase of the project is trying to tell as many people as possible about it and getting feedback, and hopefully, institutions in Turkey, Spain, Slovenia, and other countries will start to adopt the tool or use the training module. Now, why are we looking at institutional level? Simple answer is because the people behind the project, we all work at institutions, at universities. We're not from quality assurance agencies nor ministries of higher education, so we wanted to basically solve a problem that we had. And our problem was that sometimes we would like to know more about how our institutions are performing in different aspects or dimensions of internationalization, and it wasn't easy. Sometimes the data was there, sometimes it was there but not up to date. Sometimes it was not easy to understand what the data meant because, as our previous speakers were saying, nobody can agree on a single definition of a course or an international student. So we decided to look at that. When we talk about internationalization here, we're adopting, let's say, the most common definition, which comes from Jane Knight, as a process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, the functions, or the delivery of higher education. That's a definition from 2004. Nowadays, another leading author in this area, which is Hans de Wit, and if some of you were at EAIE, one of the leading conferences in Europe about this, he's always there, he always delivers a session. Now we're in a place in which internationalization is not just the job or the concern of an international office or of an Erasmus coordination office, but it becomes integral to the whole university. Why? Because we're trying to train, or we're trying to graduate students who will be competent and skilled to thrive in a globalized world. Most of them will have jobs or develop careers that in one way or another necessitate skills that can only be gained if they'd had an international exposure through their curriculum, through mobility, through international faculty, through contact with international students at their institution. So this is where different countries might be at different levels, and within country, different institutions are also at different levels. Here, what we're trying to do, as I said, we want to build a little army of ambassadors for the HEIDA project and the tool. And when we think of, well, who is going to use this in a university in the future? These are the people that we think are the, let's say, the owners of this in the future. From senior managers who might just say, I just want to know what's happening in my university, to directors of administrative units, for example, alumni, careers, international office, academic affairs, comms and marketing, who want to say, I need to use this information for my promotion, for my annual reports, for making decisions about next year's budget, to professors with international coordination or cooperation responsibilities, and coordinators at academic and administrative units. This, how do I point that? Nope. Okay, sorry. This last group of coordinators are really going to be, let's say, the people who input the data into this tool that we're presenting. But then who uses it? It's a wider group of users. Just to make a small stop here is when we talk about internationalization, as I said, as a project, we decided to think about it in terms of a process. It's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen just because you have a strategy. You might have developed a strategy 2 years ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, but if it's not understood as a process, then it becomes very difficult to implement. So there are different ways of looking at this. So, for example, you could look at it as activities, and then that's when we start to measure success in internationalization in terms of how many agreements we have, how many projects we have with partners abroad. Do we have branch campuses outside of our own country? You could look at it as competences, and as I was saying, like how can we show that our students have attitudes and values that are required of an international or globalized world. You can look at it as an ethos or as a culture. that permeates all the institutions. Now, this is what it's pointed out here, that it's kind of a weak way of looking at it, because it could just stop at the level of, it's in our website, it's in our brochures, but nothing else happens. And now, how different people at the university understand internationalization also varies. The view of internationalization of a faculty member can be very different from an administrator, from the people at the international office, from the people who deal with student services, from the people who deal with alumni. And it also needs to reflect the priorities of the institution. Internationalization for its own sake, there's no meaning to that, there's no point to that. For example, in Europe, there is a big push to provide more and more courses or modules or programs, however they are called, in English or in a language different than the local language. Now, that is beneficial, but an institution can also decide that for its own purposes of internationalization, it wants to do a bit more than that, that it's not only English, that it's something else. Oh, sorry. Back to this. Small pause for reflection. Okay. Now, that's on, let's say, the concept of internationalization. Then we said, well, what are the activities that happen in a university, and how are they managed, and how data is used to make those decisions or manage that? So we saw, I mean, these are just some of the activities, but so far we seem to have a wealth of data, raw data, about students. So students evaluate a course, they have grades, they either pass or fail courses. So in this way, universities are using this data to diagnose if there are any teaching problems or any learning problems in students. And there are already some quite good survey tools, software that can help universities track the performance of courses or specific profiles of students. Then there are certain management activities that are for internal use in terms of how do we establish alternative lines of action. If we have been doing the same thing over and over again and we don't get the results, then having data can help us to say, well, this is where we went wrong. This is why we're not achieving what we were supposed to achieve. For external purposes, it can also help to justify taking decisions. So the decision to open a new program, close the program, apply for specific research grants with specific bodies should also or can also be based on data. For external purposes, again, we can use that to contrast with other information requests. So, for example, in Turkey, a university will have requests from the Turkish Higher Education Council. The requests typically change from year to year. The definitions change also quite frequently. And then the universities are trying to set up their own indicators. So sometimes the definitions change, sometimes we might be counting apples and oranges and we're not even aware. And there's a session then in the afternoon that looks at this in more detail. Reporting daily practice. Again, we have situations, for example, with Erasmus mobility, that you have to be tracking down exactly how money is being spent, where people are in different months of the year, if they have come back, if they have submitted all their documents. So there's more of the practical monitoring, making sure everyone is okay and where they're supposed to be. And also a management activity that I think it's important, which is meanings, culture, and motivation. I'll give you an example from Koç University. There is a very clear ethos at the university to say we are international and we want to continue going up in world rankings, not only regionally but at let's say global scale, and that acts as a motivator for faculty members and for staff. For students, I don't think the message has really sunk in. But again, using data to make that message clear or more impactful can help. Now, as I said, we did a literature review and there's a lot of information out there about what works, what doesn't work when it comes to data, management, and people. And we heard a lot of the key things this morning, so I'm not going to repeat that much, but one thing that we also were learning from one of our partners is this, the third point that you see here, you know? The hardest part is always asking the right question. If you don't ask the right question, then any answer will do. So if the question is, how many international students do we have? Well, then I can choose how to count them, and I can show my manager, and he will be happy with the number or not. So this goes back to the goals, okay? And again, when we looked at the literature review and the results of this survey, what we see is that analytics is the area where our institutions are making the least progress. So we have systems to capture data, you know, spreadsheets, our own software systems, shared software systems, but the actual analysis of that data and how often that happens, the quality, if that's checked for accuracy, then that's the area where we are lacking. Now, foundations, as Andy said, are very important. So having an internationalization strategy, a plan, a piece of paper where it says these are our goals is very important. Because yeah, you will set up goals, you will have your operational objectives, you will have the set of activities that you will be doing in terms of program, people, resources, etc. And then you will be able to choose, well, what indicators are going to help us know if we are going forwards or backwards or we're just not doing anything. However, it's more complicated than that. Can I ask, out of your institutions, well, how many of you have an internationalization strategy, an official document in your institution? Please raise your hands. Oh, okay, 2, 3. Okay, all right. So those of you who have gone through that process know that it's not easy at all, because again, you have people with very different perspectives, professors from different disciplines who all have their idea of what internationalization should mean. Some of them are opposed to it completely. Some of them are very much the champions and they want to take it forward in all areas. Some units or offices might be very protective of who they provide services to and who they don't provide services to in terms of, for example, national and international staff or students. So even the process of getting to a strategy of shared goals and shared objectives takes time. And this is what we're going to try to emphasize today, is that, yes, please, you know, use the HEIDA tool in the future, but before there has to be that previous step of building your strategy. This is very similar to what was said before, but basically these are, I think, very common challenges that we all have at the point of collection. There's also then what happens at the point of analysis and at the point of what do we do with that analysis. But at the point of collection, especially in bigger institutions, and even in not so big institutions, then you find that data are across different functions. So if we want to know, for example, how many of our researchers participated in an international conference the previous year, some of this data might be in a college or in the faculty level, and they collect it every year, or it might be in the international office, it might be in the research support office. It depends on how, or it's all combined. Or it might be in the finance office, because they're the ones who actually record expenses for faculty members when they travel and they want to reimburse their expenses. Then, yeah, in terms of the quality of the data, it can be poor. It might not be collected every year, but every time there is a request from an external agent or for a specific project, then that's when we collect the data, and then people forget to just continue doing that the years after. Again, this very topic of what an indicator exactly means, it's a huge issue. In your folders, you would have seen that there is a table there. It has about 5 pages. Those are 489 internationalization indicators that were developed by a project called INPI. So we even started this project saying, look, these people developed this really nice list, you know, like you cannot think of pretty much any more indicators, like they have covered every base they could cover. And they grouped them, subgrouped them, and we said, well, we'll build on that. We're not gonna start defining new indicators or let's say, changing the definition of this, like they have done that work already, and they based that on all the information that was collected from previous exercises at European level, in the Americas and in Asia. So they brought together everything that they could find in terms of internationalization indicators. And when you look at that, when we were doing the process of translating some of our tool materials to, from English to Slovenian or Spanish or Turkish, we realized, my God, like some of these look exactly the same. It's just very, very subtle differences between some of them. And this is where these debates come in. These are the kind of half-hour debates between a dean and a coordinator about what do they actually mean by a researcher? What do they mean by a multiple degree program? So there is a glossary, thank God. There are several glossaries that can help us understand what each of these indicators mean. And I would just ask you, if you have a look, it's mind-boggling the amount of detail that you can get into and the level of the granularity that you can go when you're talking about these internationalization aspects. Now, similarly, endless data requests with different formats. So if nobody's asking for the data, maybe nobody collects it. Because, if nobody has asked for it, let's just, like don't add that column where they ask about gender, or don't add that column where it asks about place of birth instead of nationality. But then we realized, if we actually knew that, it could help us because we could maybe market our programs for a specific school, or we could establish partnerships with a university from that city because we seem to be having a lot of activities with them. So again, this is where data protection legislation, government regulations, funding regulations can be a good thing because it will make us consider in more detail what do we need to collect and how often and to what standard. So, let me see how I'm doing. Okay. The online questionnaire, as I said, was, let's say, our testing ground for our tool. What we did was we asked administrative senior managers, mostly those with responsibility for internationalization, to complete this survey early in 2016. We had over 100 responses from 13 EU countries. The majority were actually from Turkey and from Slovenia. In Turkey, we have about 180 universities, so we received 91 responses, which was great because it gave us a very good picture of how people feel data is managed in their institutions when it comes to internationalization. These were the top 5 most common dimensions that people think or associate with a need for data, that they can track, they can measure, and they use it. So partnerships, and I have to mention we have a very good session this afternoon with our guest from Belgium, which is about how do you evaluate objectively partnerships. Then international students, both full-time degree and credit mobility, services for the international community, international research projects in terms of how much money, for example, the institution receives every year from international sources, or with how many international partners it's collaborating on research, and programs. International programs meaning those that are delivered partly abroad or with an external partner simultaneously. Now, this was a surprising part for us because, as I said, we started thinking we, for example, in Turkey might be in a chaotic or above chaotic situation, yet when we saw was that, the majority thought that they are able to find internationalization data and indicators easily. 67% thought that they keep that data updated. About just over half thought the formats were easy for doing queries and reporting. And 72% were thinking, consider that senior managers use it for strategic decisions. So we thought, maybe this contradicts our whole initial assumptions. Now, these are opinions referring to specific indicators that were included in that questionnaire. And when we look at what were the top 10 most popular ones, the ones that people thought this is relevant for our institutional goals and objectives, etc., you will see the ones that are in yellow. They're yes or no questions, basically. Do you advise students on study abroad opportunities? It's a simple yes or no. You either do or you don't, okay? Does the university have a strategy for internationalization? Do you provide pre-arrival information? Do you have a structure to support internationalization? So in that sense, of course, it's easy to have the data because you either have a structure, you have a paper that's a strategy or not. But also others, for example, what proportion of students participates in outgoing exchange or mobility programs in a year? Again, this is the type of data that now our institutions are more comfortable and more trained to be able to monitor properly on a timely basis and in the right formats, because there is a mandate, for example, in the case of Erasmus, that you have to use the same tool, you have to, there's a clear definition of what they mean by the outgoing student, the mobility period, the learning agreement, and everything else. But when we look at what were the bottom 5 least popular indicators, the one that almost nobody chose out of a short list that we gave, they are mostly referring to what faculty do. So the first table was about where students go, what they learn, what they do, and the structural, let's say, the support for internationalization. But the least popular were referring to, conference presentations delivered abroad, pieces published internationally. How many of our faculty members belong to an international academic or professional association? How many of them are supervising PhD students from abroad in co-tutel type agreements? What proportion of our budget is dedicated to scholarships for international students? So again, what was interesting for us was to say, well, it seems that it's harder to request data from faculty. They don't seem to be very happy about providing that level of detail, being tracked, monitored, and having to do something more than their already very heavy workload of teaching, research, and other activities. Another interesting kind of insight from that survey was that we asked, after having completed the selected indicators and provided answers for them, how aware do you think is your institution when it comes to internationalization as a process? Now, for those institutions that said very low, we were very, very early in this whole thing, the excuses, let's say, or the reasons given for that was that either being a very new, very young institution or very small, and in some cases public, meant that there were not enough resources, whether it was budget, time, or staff, to really take the time to collect data and analyze that data. Or that because, for example, they were very young universities, internationalization was not a priority yet. There were other things to first take care of. And the same thing, that because of these things, there might not be a strategy, or there was a chronic lack of communication between departments or units. Everyone works in their little day-to-day silos. Some respondents were also trying to express the fact that because it's so many activities that can be called, that contribute to the process of internationalization, it's hard to monitor all those aspects. And some academic or even administrative units will have doubts about what do you call internationalization? Is actually adding a foreign author as part of the syllabi internationalizing the curriculum? Is that enough, or should we just count that as normal standard practice? And some were also citing the location of their university as a disadvantage for internationalization, especially those institutions that are outside of the big urban centers in each country might feel that, well, they are not able, for example, to attract international students or faculty or organize international events because it's not a well-known location or easily accessible location. Okay, so now to the meaty part of today that we're excited about. So we said, well, this is the picture that we have. When we did that tool, we also received feedback that overall, that process of selecting what do you want to do to internationalize your university, and therefore what are your goals and what are your indicators, is a useful step. So we started to build our tool. Right now, it looks like this. we have a live demo version. I didn't want to take the risk because technology, of course, it's always, treacherous. So we said, well, we'll show you how the process works step by step. And what I would ask you is that after the conference, we will send you a live test link so you can start playing with it as well and see how it works for you. So as I said, the HEIDA tool, it's web-based, so it can be accessible from anywhere on campus or off campus. As a user, for example, if you are Istanbul University or Ghent University, you would log in using your own university login system. And here comes the famous dashboard. So we tried to do something quite easy and simple, not too much information at first. It would basically tell you how many users have logged in and provided data at the whole university, which is the first box you see there. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how the red laser works. Okay. Not this one. Not this. Okay, nice. Huh? Oh, it's okay. All right, I'll point. Old school pointing. Then from those users, how many departments it represents or units. And then how many indicators have been completed. So for how many things do we have data for. And the process is basically you select your goals, you then, according to the goal you have selected and the type of dimension you want to look at, then it would show you specific indicators that are the most relevant for those. So I will ask you to go back to your printed list of indicators so that I can show you some examples. Then you input the data and then you can view reports. Now, on the bottom, there are some resources, which is what I was talking about. If in doubt of what an international student means, or ECTS credit means, or course means, there are glossaries that were developed for the INPI project that we're using here, and there's some complementary glossaries as well that you can use there. There's some key definitions as well, a tutorial, and then there is a link to our online training course so that you can access the Moodle classroom. So the tool would have three types of users. As I said, an admin, which what we envision is that in the first year would be a member of the international office, because somebody has to start this in an institution, and your IT or information and technologies communications office, because they would be responsible for the technical, let's say, installation of the tool. And they would give permissions to specific users as editors or as just read-only or viewers. Now, as I said, we define three main types of units. So either you belong and you will be providing data or viewing data for an academic unit, an administrative or non-academic unit, and a research unit. There's a space there for other if there's something else in the institution that can be classified as any of these three. Then each of these has, let's say, a subunit. So for example, for academic units, we define colleges, graduate schools, faculties, departments. Again, the terminology in each country is different, and you are able to change those names. So in your university, if it's not colleges but faculty, then you use that terminology. If it's called something else, you can change it. In the non-academic or administrative units, we put an initial list that could cover, president's office, corporate relations office, communications, student services, alumni, facilities. Again, you can add units according to what your institution has or doesn't have. The goals. Okay, so we said each institution will try to achieve different things when it comes to internationalization. The INPI project had defined 5 key goals, and I'm going to read them so that we're clear about what we're talking about. So the first one is to enhance the quality of education. Clear enough? Second one is to enhance the quality of research. Third one is to well prepare students for life and work in an intercultural and globalizing world. Fourth one is to enhance the international reputation and visibility of the unit. This is a growing goal of most universities, as I said, as they're trying to compete internationally for talent in terms of faculty, funding, students, and it becomes ever more and more important. And we have all seen the rise of rankings. And again, there is a big debate about how beneficial they are to higher education as a whole in terms of how they drive institutions to make decisions. But that will be a topic maybe for our coffee break and our lunch when we discuss this. And a fifth one, which is to provide services or service to society and community social engagement. We found that this was the least understood goal of internationalization amongst universities across all the countries that were responding to the survey, because I don't want to say least understood, but least chosen in terms of dimensions. It seems as if we know very well what we can do in terms of teaching, in terms of learning outcomes, in terms of research, but very little about how service to the communities around the university, or in a wider sense, how the university can accomplish that. So in the tool, basically, these are the 5 goals. And as a user, you can choose, of course, more than one, because we're trying to do not only one thing. But you can also add a new goal. So if your university has something very specific that it wants to achieve in the long term, then you can add that to the goal. Now, when we talk about dimensions of internationalization, this classification has 9 groups, okay? So it can go into students, staff, administration, funding and finance, curriculum and academic services, research, promotion and marketing, non-academic. So it goes into, let's say, the major areas or functions of a university. And then there are subgroups that look at more specific dimensions of internationalization. So when we look at students, for example, we can be talking about study abroad or mobility. We can be talking about international students specifically. We can be talking about general student data, and so on and so forth. So it's a very long classification. Again, you can add subgroups if there's specific, very specific item in your university that you want to track. So after that comes the indicators. That's the list that you have in front of you. We said we're not going to create more indicators, we're not going to change their meaning, we're going to take what is there as a very good initial database and put it in our tool so that people can start using them and tracking how data is managed for each of them. And again, if you think there's something very specific that hasn't been captured in that list of 489, so you can add to the tool. When you look at what are those indicators, there are some that refer to inputs. Okay, so what are the resources that the university is putting to support internationalization? For example, what proportion of full-time employees are employed for international student visa applications? Okay, so this is something that, for example, you would collect from either your human resources department or the international office. It depends on where it's coming from. And here, I have to make the point, unit here, again, we can go from the level of a program, like the MBA program, to the level of the college or the faculty or the whole university, okay? Then there are some indicators that are related to outputs. So out of these resources that we put in, what are the immediate quantifiable outputs that we can see? So for example, ratio of conference presentations delivered abroad or in the context of international conference to the number of researchers in the unit. So out of these people that we're employing to do things, how many of them are presenting the university abroad and raising the visibility of the institution? Then there are those that are more about outcomes, which are longer term, harder to measure in a way, results from this process of internationalization. And again, an example. Out of all the academic staff members in the unit, let's say College of Sciences, what proportion is involved in international joint or double degree programs? Why is this an outcome example? Because if any of you has been involved in setting up a joint or double degree, you should know that it is a very, very long, complicated, sometimes very bureaucratic process that takes time. It doesn't happen simply because you have signed an MOU with a university. It doesn't simply happen because you have students from that university. It is a process that will show its results after some time. And then we have some indicators which are qualitative. And again, this was part of the feedback that we got from that online questionnaire, that people said we should have some way of measuring more qualitative, non-tangible aspects of internationalization at the university. Of course, it's not easy, but here is an example, which again, it's a yes or no answer. Are there regulations, procedures enabling and supporting internationalization? So here the answer can be yes or no or partially. We're on the way. We started, but we failed, and we're revising. So this is how the indicator tries to measure this. This is a table that we included in our online training because I think it gives a very clear kind of step-by-step, or let's say, narrative of how do you actually measure outcomes and impact in internationalization and how you use data for that. It's not easy. So I mentioned to you 5 goals. Here we have an example from goal 1, which is about education, goal 2 for research, and goal 4 for reputation and visibility. I'm not going to go through each of them. I'm just going to take the first one to give an example. So an output of internationalization is that in 2006, Koç University, I will keep using my institution as an example, sent 10 bachelor students on an exchange program to Autónoma de Barcelona. Then 2 years later, as an outcome, 4 of those students graduated from Koç after completing a research project that focused on topics they were introduced to an institution wide. So our students from archaeology did a semester of exchange at Autónoma in their archaeology department, in which they looked at Byzantine archaeology in the Iberian Peninsula. And then they developed their graduating thesis or a project or a group project in the same topic. And then 2 of these students went on to master's programs in the field related to this research. This is the hardest part. How are we tracking what these students are doing? Is anyone actually keeping a spreadsheet saying, this student with this ID number, besides the courses and the credits and everything that they've done and that they went on exchange to Autónoma de Barcelona, this was their thesis project, and can you link that information back? And then when we look at impact, here the example is, 4 years later, in 2012, one of these students was a PhD candidate carrying cooperation, like research cooperation, with both Koç University and Autónoma de Barcelona. Why? Because he spent time there. He met people, he made networks, and the doctoral project then helped to launch a new joint master's course between the institutions. So this last part is the hardest one to track. So we will always have anecdotal evidence of these things, that we know of specific students, specific professors who manage these things, but there needs to be a culture of, we need to really start tracking not only our current students, but our applicants, our students, then our alumni. What are they doing? Where are they going? Who are they collaborating with? And again, this is with the caveat of data protection and invasion of privacy, and people not wanting sometimes to really let us know what they're doing. Okay, so having made that kind of reflection about some things are easier to measure, others a bit harder, what let's say the process as a user, as an editor, is that you first select your goals. So let's say in the College of Humanities at the university, right now they have agreed after lengthy deliberations that one of their key goals is that they want to enhance their international reputation and visibility. Why? Because they want to attract more international professors, okay? Then that's the goal, so you select that goal. Then you would say, specifically, we want to be advancing on our areas of research. So that's your group. And then more specifically, in terms of researcher activity. So after having searched that, when you click filter, what it's going to show you is not 489 indicators. It's going to show you a much smaller list. So the indicators you see there's some more at the bottom, would be those that have been assessed as the most relevant to achieve that goal for that group and that subgroup, okay? So, we see here internationally funded research projects, proportion of faculty or researchers that has spent a semester abroad conducting research. So we selected this one, for example. What proportion of researchers is involved in at least one research project with an international partner? Okay? So here what we do is that we add the data. We select, I'm going to be providing this for an academic unit, which is a college, and it's for the College of Sciences. Okay? That's the kind of step by step. After we do that, we say, well, the question was asking in a given year. We can select 2016 or 2015, or we can select more than 1 year, and we can select if we want to reply in terms of academic year, 2015-16, or calendar year. And then we simply write the value. When we started the project, we wanted to somehow find a magical coding formula that would allow us not to be having to manually enter these values, but that it would extract them from spreadsheets that were located in different parts of the university. That is the dream. Let's call it like that. And if anyone knows a magical, superhuman coder who can do that, then please let us know, because we would like to do that. However, we then also consider what Andy was talking about, that sometimes a lot of those spreadsheets that we rely to give us that data have flaws and have errors, or the person who had them left and they were in their computer and now we don't have them. Situations like this. So this step is what we see as the most important one when it comes about culture of collaboration and sharing information. Because here what we pictured is the academic or administrative coordinator of the College of Sciences being asked to complete this, and she will say, well, I don't know. I only have the data for last year. I don't have it for the previous years. So that means she or he will have to pick up the phone or go to another office and ask that question, and then realize, well, are we keeping this data or not? And why did we stop? Or if we still are doing that, how are we actually making sure it's accurate? So that step of actually filling out the values for each indicator is the real value here, because it will take time. It will mean talking to colleagues outside of your own unit in some cases, and realizing where there are some areas where the data management practice could be improved. Now, what I've shown you so far until the adding values part is based on the INPI project. What the HEIDA project tried to do is say, well, when somebody's looking at this and wants to know if this is actually, how is this indicator built and managed, there are some questions that we could ask. So the questions we're asking is simply to say, do we have the data for this? Yes or no? Because at least if somebody records and says we don't have it, then whoever uses the tool as a viewer, they know that there's no point in going around sending emails to ask about this, because we simply have never collected this and maybe never will. Then, is this indicator optional or compulsory? Are we required to actually track this and report it every year or every 5 years or every semester? How frequently do we collect data for this indicator? And then again, there are options. Who is responsible for collecting the data? So these are multiple choice, answers, because as I said, in many cases, to build an indicator, you need data from one unit, like human resources or finance, and you need data from another one, which is your own unit. Now, there's basically 8 questions. And the 5th one is, what do we use this for? And this, you will be able to answer this once you have talked to other colleagues. So it turns out that I thought the conferences delivered abroad are only used in our annual report, but it turns out that it's also a Turkish Higher Education Council requirement, or it turns out that it's something very important when you're applying for ERC grants. Okay, so in that process we understand what are we using that information for. Do we have procedures for ensuring the data is accurate? This was a very contentious kind of question because, again, the answer can be yes, no, or partially. But we would prefer to keep it as a no if it's not 100%, if it's not a strong system for quality assurance or accuracy, then it's better to say no and to know that we shouldn't trust 100% what that value is. And then the last two questions are about format. So I showed you the example, how many of the researchers are involved in a project with an international partner. So is this an Excel spreadsheet in which we have the name of the faculty member, which college they belong to, what is the name of the project, what is the name of the partner, in which country? Is it a simple report? Is it paper-based records? And then what is the data, how is the data and the indicator available? Is it public? Is it published on our website? Is it in an annual report that is also public, or is it internal only? So after we do that, we save the responses, and we start building that. So it's a process, okay? It will take, for example, a unit if they have decided on choosing 10 indicators for their unit. It will take some time to basically answer all of this and the previous step of achieving or agreeing on their goals. Now, when we talk to a lot of the universities, what they said is, what we don't have is good or easy visualization or reporting tools for this. So the reports part of the tool basically shows you how many indicators have been completed, and then you can have the option of editing, deleting them, or visualizing in terms of a graph or a table. This is a part where our tool is not very sophisticated. There are statistical analysis, visualization tools that are free to use that we have included in our online training that can show you something prettier if you want to show it in reports or if you want to make it publicly available. But yeah, I mean, it would basically, if you have put data for several years, it will show you how it performs. If it's gone up, down, stay the same, or if it's a yes or no question, it will show you if we were doing something and we stopped doing it and not. So to sum up, the tool has these functions. You can select indicators, you can add data for several or various years, you can visualize performance, you can export so that you can use in other ways, and you can search also by keywords. So if I am the vice rector and I want to know about joint degrees, I type that word and it would show me which indicators have been completed for the university in that way. All right, how are we doing now? Okay, following up? Okay. Last part here is to talk about our training module. So as we said, before you start telling people, let's start using this tool, there needs to be a bit of training behind. So we prepared this training module in an open access Moodle classroom hosted by our partner university in Slovenia. Right now it's available in English, and later it will be available in Spanish, Slovenian, and Turkish. This is what it looks like, and these are, let's say, the chapters. And within each chapter you will find, as I said, specific readings and reflections and exercises that you can give to your staff, to your directors to go through to get through that process of thinking, what do we need to do, how can we use data more effectively as an institution and specifically for internationalization. There we're also putting references to other projects that have, like for example the HEIDA project from the United Kingdom that has developed very extensive practical guidance in terms of data management. Okay, so it's an example of, for example, for some of the content in one of the chapters and how you would see the different readings. Oh. Okay. So I'm very, very glad that I finally got to tell you about this because we have been working very hard on developing this tool and the training module for the past year or so. As I said, we want input, we want people to start using this, and here are, let's say, the key stats of how you can follow and contribute further to the project. But now really, we have, oh my God, we have overrun a little bit. We have time for your feedback, for your questions, suggestions. Now is the time. So I open the floor to you now. Yeah. So okay, so you mean if the tool could be used to compare institutions?
Just if I upload data,
Uh-huh.
what happens with it? Is it only for me?
Yes.
Or do you have insights?
No. So this was also asked, and some of the workshops we did. This is primarily an internal tool for institutions. Now, the ability to export as a report, let's say the performance of indicators, could then be built into, let's say a comparison across institutions in the same country or across countries. But our primary function is to help individual institutions internally to monitor in a better way their internationalization performance in different dimensions. So at the moment, no. So we won't be able to see any of the data from Ghent University nor vice versa. So, okay. Yes.
And some technical questions. There was a copyright mentioned at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
The software is an open source software? Or
Yeah. So the project is funded by the European Union. So this as a product of the project is open access and free for any university.
Is it an open source?
Open source. So what will happen is that if you request us to use the tool, you would receive an installation guide for your IT department. Don't ask me that part, please, because I am not a coding person at all, or software development person, but the guide basically tells them how to install it in the system and the code, and then you can also tailor it. So you can, for example, upload your university logo, you decide in which server you're going to store the data, and all of these other technical aspects.
Because of the import issue you mentioned, I think it's pretty almost impossible to collect from different spreadsheets and whatever to a web-based tool. But what could be possible is an import from CDS, for example, the CSV files. Do you have this part already in the tool?
No. So this is hopefully maybe we can apply for a new project to do this, but because we started looking, for example, at our institutions, and we realized some of this data is on an for example, SAP system, whilst other is in our student record system, and then others are in simple spreadsheets. Others are literally in paper records. So because there is that lack of integration of systems, then it means that for this tool, you input the data manually.
But this is a good starting point because most of the implemented information systems could export CSVs.
Yeah.
But you probably will need to adjust the value, the fields in this to import.
To take that, yeah. Okay.
Convince all the academics and all the research staff to put all these data, and then for how long will you be able to use that, or how long will you be able to use that?
Okay, so let's say the partner in the project responsible for the online tool is Koç University. So our IT department, they are basically the ones who built this from the ground up. And we are committed for at least 2 years after the end of the, let's say, funding part of the project to provide technical support for universities who want to use the tool. Yeah. So after that, hopefully, we would have more kind of detailed, like frequently asked questions or troubleshooting type sections that can be permanently on the project website. didn't know, and that's also why we built it as an open source tool, in the sense that then each university can also start to play with it. Basically, they can develop it further. They can add more functions. They can add more, yeah.